My name is Dougal Grimes. I am Inventor Relations for Hasbro and Games, which basically means I represent you guys, inventors. I look at your games and I represent them as best as I can at Hasbro, bring them in and try and sell them internally. And I'm going to show you right now Inventor Relations in action. Always go to the inventors, remove the barrier. So here I am. So I'm going to introduce you guys, and then I want to ask you a little question about how you got into it. So starting on my far right here, we have the wonderful Sir Torquil Norman, founder of Bluebird Toys, and the creator of the Big Yellow Teapot, an absolute classic, and also a very strong arts philanthropist as well. Next to him, we have Richard Heayes, my former colleague, and he is now a fantastic inventor of Heayes Design. And while Rich was at Hasbro, he created some of our best-selling games and products. He's a fantastic developer for Hasbro. And beside him, we have Rena Nathanson, creator of the amazing Bananagrams. And I think this is a really, really important person to have here because basically, as we were talking about earlier with Scrabble and this, it was a word games category. How do you innovate in a word games category? Bananagrams did exactly that. It was fantastic. And then we also have, you heard from earlier, we have Dr. Jim Wyatt, creative director of WOW Labs. Fantastic. So, I'm going to start off with Sir Norman, and I'd just like you to ask these, tell these people, how did you first get into the toy and game industry?
I had a slightly checkered career, but I wound up as a banker for a short period and decided that wasn't something for me. And so I teamed up with a friend and we started a business whose job it was to lend money to small companies who couldn't otherwise get it from the banks and so on. That's a whole new industry now, but in those days it was more difficult. One of the companies that I got involved with was called Berwick's Toy Company in Liverpool, and Ken Berwick had a very good position making the cheapest games and play suits and so on. We made a little football game that I think retailed for £1.11, so that gives you an idea. You get a straw and a little ball. Anyway, so we started at Berwick's Toy Company, and I have 5 children, and I guess I had a homemade sort of development team. But we built that business one way and another into a group called Bluebird Toys. And Bluebird Toys made Polly Pocket, for example, and various other things that were certainly pure inventions.
Fantastic. So, Rich, can you tell us a little bit how you first got into the toy industry?
Sure. Well, I trained as a product designer, so I left university thinking I knew everything about manufacturing. I knew actually nothing. And my first job was designing a new mop to beat the Addis mop. It worked, so I went off and designed a whole range of sort of household gadgets and kitchen stuff and things like that. And it was okay, didn't really actually inspire me too much. And then I started working for a small giftware company, and that really kind of started to interest me because although the products weren't sort of super high end, actually what you were designing was experiences, and there was nothing better than showing your product to some kids, and they were they'd actually really engage with it. I think actually it's pretty good. I want to get I want to stay in this industry. So I managed to get a job at Hasbro. And I was there 18 years, had an absolutely fantastic time, worked on a whole range of brands, toys and games. And last year I left there to pursue my own interests, but hopefully another 20 odd years left inventing in me.
Fantastic.
At least 20.
So Rena, can you just tell me a little bit how you first got into it? And I know you've got a fantastic story about this, but how did you first get into toys and games?
Basically, we started where I grew up in a game-playing family. Everything became a game. Whether it was putting the vegetables in the refrigerator, everything became a game and was silly. And we wanted a game that we could play with all the generations, my children, myself, and my parents. Something that was quick and easy and user-friendly and didn't take 2 hours. And was very little setup. So we came up with Bananagrams with no inkling that it was going to become what it is. It was just a family game that we played with friends and family. And then we were told by friends and family, you should do something with this, you know. So we thought, okay, we'll roll the dice, and we had 50 made, literally, and I ironed on all the logos, and brought 25 back here to England, and we put 25 in a store in Rhode Island. And they sold out pretty quickly, and okay, we'll have 500 made. So we did that, and did the same thing, 250, 250, and they sold out. And then I thought, okay, I'm going to take a chance at the London Toy Fair, which was then at Excel, which was interesting, to say the least, as a venue. And again, we took a space in the greenhouse, which as inventors, it's a very handy space for you guys to know at the Toy Fair, because it's a great place to show your good, new, fresh, innovative ideas, which nobody else has seen before. So we took a little teeny stand, and we had a great reaction, and we pretty much took orders hand over fist throughout the whole fair. But it was truly a family invention. You know, I can't take all the credit. It was my parents and my children, the three of us, the 3 generations.
Fantastic. And Jim, can you tell us a little bit, because recently you've started working with WoW stuff, but you've been in the toy and game industry for a while, and he actually occupies the office of Jim Henson's studio in LA, which is really cool.
Muppet Labs, yeah. 1999, I was a lab rat at Reading University doing a very worthy PhD that was boring me to tears. And I had an evening work where I would go out to schools and do presentations to try and get kids interested in robotics and physics. And someone saw one of my presentations and saw the little robots that we'd got that we took out to schools, and they said, oh, could you break that down and put it on the front of a magazine? I said, oh yeah, so I took one of my professor's cards, scrubbed out his name, put mine, handed it over, and about a year later I got a phone call saying, could you come in? And I went in, and 6 months later I found myself in China, and I was living out there for about 8 years as we developed this robot series, and which did incredibly well, all publishing based. And then I stayed out there, set up, had relationships with manufacturers, and we started our own Inventor group doing educational robotics. And then about 5 years ago, met Wow Stuff at the Nuremberg Toy Fair, where we had our own booth and we were showing our own product. And last year they bought us because we brought something new to the company, specifically in the area of technology. And so they acquired us, and now we're on to great things.
Absolutely. You guys have got some great innovative products as well, which is fantastic. So the objective of this panel talk is how we made it. And I thought that was actually quite a clever title, because it's double meaning. How we made it, the games and toys they're famous for, but also their experience through the toy and game industry, because we really do here have some of the leading experts in the industry, which is fantastic. So I'm going to start with Torquil. Can you, when we're looking at how we made it, I'm always very interested in the creative side. So something like Polly Pocket. Can you tell us where that idea came from and how it sparked?
I can tell you exactly, yes. We used to work with an engineering toy developer called Origin, and you probably know Chris Wiggs, Chris Taylor, and so on. Chris Wiggs used to present us with toys of all sorts, and we used to accept some and and so on. One day I went in to see Chris Wiggs, and he said, I want to show you something that I made for my daughter 6 years ago, but I never thought it was commercial, but she enjoyed it and so on. And he produced a wooden box with a little wooden doll in it that was solid wood, and said, what did I think of it? And really wanted something to say more than anything else. I said, can you make the doll move and bend at the waist and head and so on? He said, no, it's too small and it wouldn't be possible. And I said, well, come on, you're a good engineer, I'd like to see one. So I'll come back in a couple of weeks, and we looked at it. And that was really the start of Polly Pocket. But it was one of those products which was so easy to develop once the original idea had taken hold. And we made little rings and little compacts and so on. And we dealt with Mattel in all sorts of other areas. And so I thought, what the hell, I may as well go and show it to them. And rather unusually, because normally getting to see a buyer is difficult enough, but I got Jill Barrett, who was the chief executive, Lindsay Williams, who looked after the world markets, and John Ammerman, and I said, I'd like to see everybody, please, for half an hour in your presentation room. And so I took over the first year's range of Polly Pocket, which was mostly little compacts and little rings you could put on your finger. And these guys were sitting up in a sort of dais a bit higher, and I was sitting a bit lower. And I had set out the entire Polly Pocket range underneath my pocket handkerchief. And they said, Torquil, you know, we do this as a friend, but aren't you wasting our time? And I said, well, I don't think so. So I lifted up the corner of the handkerchief and took out this little tiny figure, which in those days was about 1.25 inches high, and said, well, this is Polly Pocket. And they sort of could hardly see it, handed it round, looked at it, and so on. Just said, well, what does he do? So I took a little ring and put Polly into her bath and clipped it on my finger, and then the compact and so on. Anyway, I think, you know, they were intrigued by what was an idea. I don't think anyone had produced a doll that small as an actual character. And the first year, Mattel didn't do particularly well with it. We thought they sold 1.5 million products or something, which was nothing at that price point.
I'd still take a million units.
And so one day I was sitting in my office the following year, and the phone rang, and it was Jill Barrett who rang up and said, Torquil, how quickly can you make us 4.5 million Polly Pocket compacts? I said, blimey, you only took 1 million last year. I shouldn't, you know, why do you want them, sort of thing. And he said, well, everything's sold out of the shelves, they're completely clean, and we're desperate for them. And anyway, we slightly changed the first year's range in terms of colours, and introduced the second year immediately. And I told her she could have them, this was February, by end of April she could have them. She was delighted. And from that moment we never looked back, and Polly Pocket ultimately wound up doing with them about $200 million. And you know, my original meeting was justified.
Yeah, of course. So I think there's some really key points in there, I think, is the kind of collaboration that you had with the inventors at the start, feedback, and then perseverance and going to see the right people and, you know, pushing that through. And timing and seeing the right person can be a huge part of it, just almost as important as the initial idea. I just really wanted to ask Jim about this as well, because, you know, your products are very different from Polly Pocket. And, you know, very innovative, and there's a lot to it. How do you begin by creating something that's very technologically advanced and forward-thinking, such as Real Effects, which you're about to release?
Yeah, Real Effects was one of those things where we had an idea in a pub, as usual, and we really, it was very difficult to communicate. We did this whole sketch thing and took it round to a few people and showed it to them and said it's basically slot car racing without the slots. But no one believed we could do it, which comes up quite a lot. You know, when you're working at the cutting edge of toy, there's still a lot of people that still consider technology in toys to be push a button, light a light, or make a sound. And if you can't get beyond that, then you've got to build it, and that's what we did. And it was a 2-year project for us to build that first prototype and actually get it working, because it uses some fairly sophisticated algorithms, and luckily we had those guys in-house that was part of our original Inventor group that could do that. But sometimes you have to either build something or mock it up to actually communicate that and get that across. But ultimately it's a credibility thing. Once you've done one and you go in and say, we can do the impossible, then people are going to maybe believe you, but you've got to get that credibility over.
Yeah, that's also a very good point. I would quite like to ask you, For new inventors who are coming up with things that are potentially quite complex, how would you advise them on creating prototypes? Because obviously it can be quite an expensive process, and it does help with the selling, but is there any tips that you can give them in terms of if you have a complex idea, or even something that's simple can be quite, how do you advise them on in terms of making a prototype? What's the best approach for this?
Cannibalize it, if you can. The toy industry, you're working with the cheapest grade of products generally. The cheapest motors is going to be the lowest cost electronics because it's got to get down to that price point. And you will find all of those in toys that are already on the shelves. There's also, for electronics development, we're blessed that we have Arduino now, and these simple processors on a board with all the memory, and you can get sensors and things like that. You can at least build your prototype. If you've got some programming knowledge, you should be able to pick that up. But it really comes down to your ability, or knowing people that do have that ability that maybe you can partner with, because partnership goes right from the smallest company all the way up to the biggest companies, and partnerships are really important because you can't have every skill. There's so many skills now that you need, be it app programming or network programming, or CAD design or sculpting. But if you just want to get the basic idea across, go down to Toys R Us, get your Dremel out,
start hacking a Furby apart.
Start hacking them apart and putting them back together again. And it looks like those horror toys from under the bed in Toy Story.
It's fun as well.
But if you can get that across, that's great.
That's great. And so kind of moving on from that, actually, I wanted to ask Rich. So obviously you worked internally at Hasbro. And is there certain characteristics, once you've had an initial idea, part of the development process, what kind of things should new inventors be considering before they start really developing an item, even before potentially pitching it to a large company? What are the considerations?
I think one of the sort of simple traps that's been mentioned before is just basic research. We live in the world of the internet. When I started the toy business, it was literally you had to go down to walk around Woolworths and walk into all the shops to see if it existed. Now you can just Google it and see. And it annoys me when people show me something. Look, have you actually been down to Toys R Us? It's on Amazon. It's currently selling. So just 101. Just make sure no one else is doing it. But I really just sort of building what Jim said. I think there's this illusion maybe at Hasbro. We would spend tens of thousands of pounds on every model. No, we wouldn't. We would make it out of cardboard and board. We'd go down to Toys R Us. I remember something back about 10 years ago. There was something in a Barbie toy that we needed. We literally bought like 20 of them. Probably the sales figures for that local store. This is the hottest item going. We just took them out and cut them all up and took this little thing out because it was the cheapest way to do it. So we do all those kind of things. And as inventors, I would don't go and take out a loan. Develop these ideas. Don't fall in love with them either, because you don't want to end up in a messy divorce. And I guarantee you, if you fall in love with it too much, it will happen. You've got to sort of keep your ideas as kind of fond acquaintances, and you want to have a lot of them. Don't sort of try, because if you invest too much in one singular idea, it can really wear you out, because you'll be touting this idea, and you just don't want that to happen. You're creative people. You want to keep coming up with ideas. So, but yeah, just develop the idea as best you can in the cheapest way you can. We've all got smartphones now. You can get iMovie. You can do a little video. I think Phil said at the start, a little 30-second video. And start to sort of test the idea. Don't just test it with your family. I know it's a classic thing. Try and find some other people. Hook up with a local school. That's what I do. Schools are very happy to work with inventors on design technology projects and work with them on lunchtime clubs to test your idea out. And advice: don't be there when they do that. They always say it's the best thing they've ever seen. Leave it with them. Walk away so you get some kind of honest feedback. But yeah, just make sure that what you're working with is what you think it is, as good as you think it is.
Great, that's really, really good insight there. The best idea is to have lots of ideas, I think. Particularly within this industry where the success rate, even when it comes internally, is so low, I think it's really important to just keep bringing those ideas. Don't be tied to it. You can develop it, you can show it another time, but really keep driving those ideas and pushing yourself to innovate. I just wanted to then go quickly to when you have this idea and you developed it, and you're selling it, I really see there's kind of two avenues. You can either license it to a manufacturer to make it for you, or via a broker who might do the negotiations on your behalf, or you can kind of choose to go it alone, which is very interesting. particularly nowadays where you have things like Kickstarter, where you can gather people to back it. And I think it's quite important when you have Rena here, because you literally went it alone. And I think the Bananagram story is kind of like the Beatles in a way, because it had been shown around a few companies and rejected. And I've met the people that have rejected it, and you're like, what are you doing? It's Bananagrams. But there's lots of reasons. There's lots of reasons behind it. What's the decision process in terms of how you would start going by yourself?
Well, basically, one of the things, going by yourself, be prepared to send out a lot of samples. Once you have your prototype or production samples, make sure they work, and don't be afraid, don't be stingy. Send them to everybody, because I think somebody else mentioned earlier, a letter and an email and a phone call is not going to happen when buyers are seeing hundreds of things a week. So if you land something on their desk that actually looks a bit different, that isn't in a box, which is one of our very conscious decisions. We were asked by many of the mass buyers to put it in a box, and we stuck to our guns and said no, when we hate plastic, we hate extra cardboard for ecological reasons as well. And our products are very tactile, and we want to maintain that. So I guess stick to your guns. If you believe in the packaging and your product, stick with it. Don't be stingy. Put aside some of your budget to just give away, because that's a big thing, is to get it in front of the right people. Yeah, and I think that's.
And I think it's interesting, the whole Bananagrams. You kind of tied in the marketing with it was an absolute genius masterstroke when you decided to put it in the banana, because that just ties in with the marketing of it. People see it, they're interested. So that was just in terms of thinking about your product, not just as a box on shelf. What is that? Well, why would people pick it up? You can even suggest to manufacturers, I think this should look like X, because that could tie into it, and it's really important.
Unfortunately, though, sometimes reality sort of forces your hand in that we have had to put it, in some occasions, in a point-of-purchase box, which, it's a crate. But our ideal point of purchase is a tree that we had designed that they hang off like a banana tree. And when people see it, they can't help but reach out and touch it. And once they touch it, you've got them.
Yeah.
So just try and stick to your guns, and don't be, learn from what the larger retailers want, but don't be bullied by them at the same time, if that makes any sense.
Okay, fantastic. I'm going to open the floor to questions just after I want to ask another question to our experts here, because I'm always very interested in this, particularly because in my job I'm reviewing games. First I want to ask Torquil, what makes a great toy? What do you feel? And I know this is a tough question, but in your mind, you've seen a lot and you've had a lot of success yourself. What is that kind of X factor that makes a great toy?
People used to ask me what qualified me to be a toy inventor, effectively. And my answer always was, which I think is true, is an eye for detail and a mental age of about 7. I don't know. I mean, what I think is vital is that you have to grab the kid's attention instantly. They don't have long attention spans for things. I was taught early on, never advertise 2 products in the same commercial, because one will sell and the other will be a dog, and that seems to always be true. So the answer is, I think it's got to appeal to young people instantly.
Great. And I'm going to flip the same question, but for games, to Rich, because you've seen a lot of games that's come through Hasbro, developed a lot, Inventor items. What is that kind of X factor?
I think probably I'd sum it up with simplicity and depth, in that it has to be easy to understand. Even a complex strategy game, you have to understand the principle of it. But even the simplest of games needs some depth, because that's what's going to hook you into a game. Once you've played it a few times, you go, oh yeah, I see how you won that. Next time I'll beat you. And you've got to sort of feel you can come back with somewhat, that keeps you engaged as a player. And that's the same with any game, digital, physical, anything. It's got to have simplicity to draw you in, and it's got to have the depth to keep you hooked.
Yeah, great. And just before I want to ask one last thing. I had a couple of questions on here, but this is an important one, okay, Samantha? You got to bear with me. And then you guys can ask some questions. The next one is just, for me, like in terms of innovation, and WoW stuff is definitely a company that innovates. going forward and looking forward into the future, how important is the cross between digital and physical going to become, and how are you guys approaching that with your products going forward?
Okay, actually, something that came up when you were saying about not being married to an idea. It's that the toy industry is changing. What is the traditional toy industry is now spreading out across the industry. People are playing more. People now have apps on their phones, and adults are playing little video games on the train as they're on their way into work. It's something that wasn't happening before. People are going back to their childhood more and more and more, and they've got the time to do it. And so we're looking at other areas. I was saying earlier, back in 2003, I had this idea for a little RFID-based figure that you stuck on a digital port, and I took it to every toy company. I never thought of taking it to a video game company, and I hear that more and more and more. So maybe broaden your horizon, think about other places that you could take your ideas, because it's not just the big boys now, there's other companies out there. Maybe it's something that works with your smart fridge or whatever it is. You were saying about putting food into a fridge game. Well, maybe there is something in that,
And that is a very important point, because from my point of view at work, when we're bringing in ideas, there's an important distinction between what is new and what's incremental to a business, rather than bringing us stuff that would potentially just substitute. So at Hasbro, obviously, if you bring us a property trading game, unfortunately we already have one. But if you bring us something that's a new game to be played on a smart fridge, well, that's kind of interesting. It's like, well, maybe Hasbro can sell, look into it, use one of our brands on it. So it's definitely a really good point to say, start thinking incrementally rather than substitutionally what's already out there. It's important for us to refill that, but definitely be thinking ahead. So I'm going to put it out to the crowd now, and this is a round out Dougal. So ask some questions out there, and you've got a really good opportunity to ask these guys. So, gentleman down the front. Oh, have we got, where's the...
Got one over there.
Oh, Billy. Oh, we have one here, and we'll jump to you over there. There we go.
How do you handle rejection? I mean, my game is my third child, basically, so if someone says my eldest child is fat and smells and doesn't have a good personality, I'd probably slap them. And people are doing the same to my game on a semi-regular basis, so how do you handle rejection?
I think you've just got to get used to it. One thing when I worked at Hasbro, we literally developed hundreds of ideas, and I'd stand up, in front of, a meeting like yourself and country managers and buyers all around the world, and I'd be selling my heart out, and I'd get this. Sometimes you've just got to go with it. It's the nature of an inventor. Some ideas are going to win, some ideas are not. That's why you just got to keep inventing, keep coming up with ideas, and that way, hopefully, the one that you perhaps didn't even think was going to be successful will be successful. But you've got to spread your bets.
Can I just interject one thing? If we've been through lots of incarnations of all the different games we have. If it isn't getting a great reception, ask why, and then listen to the audience or whoever's playing it or the feedback. Address those, the problems or challenges. Don't just think it's perfect and I love it the way it is. Of course, if it's your child, you do. But if it's a game, you can change it. So I would say just keep an open mind and listen to the feedback.
And there may be absolutely nothing wrong with it. You may have just got it's so obvious to you in your head. And why has no one done this before? You've maybe just in the pitch skipped over that key point that you need to get across first. But oh yeah, of course, that's genius. Of course, it may also not be. but someone, keep going, and you will find someone that can at least see what it is that you see. They may not take it, but they should be able to see it.
The gentleman down here.
Hi, Graham Fraser-Bell from Accentuate Games Limited. Question for the panel, really about games. Could you speak to life cycle? Is there a kind of cycle of sustainable sales for a game, and is there a generic kind of period from the growth phase to when it plateaus?
It's a very good question. So, I mean, games is a very. I'll jump in a wee bit here, because I've worked in fortunate enough to work in a few different parts of Hasbro, and games is very unique in the sense that it does require a bit more grassroots. It does require like a build-up phase. Hasbro's fortunate to have a lot of grandfathered in, so to speak, and acquisitions that just become ubiquitous, like your Monopolies and your Scrabbles in North America and things like that. I think it needs to have time to grow, and then when you reach a specific phase, if you do have something on your hand, you could be looking at, a lot of companies have done this with things like Logo Game, and that have something that is able to sustain itself yearly. And I think the thing with games is literally getting the word out there and getting people playing at a level where you get this kind of social currency of it being an accepted game. I think obviously it's easy for me to say, but it's one of those things, it's just getting out there. Last Christmas we played X, Cards Against Humanity. I'm going to play it again this year, and it builds up over time. And I'd say that that then can be relatively sustainable. I mean, it's tougher to launch new brands just because of the cycle of people demanding instant returns, but for games and companies, mid companies that can do that, they can see the rewards after, really, really investing in it over time and building up. I hope does this answer your question?
Look, if you said money will plateau, 3 years being acceptable.
3 years can be a kind of a
Monopoly's 80 next year.
Yeah.
So, but that is obviously. But it's interesting. If you look at that brand, in the last 10 years, it's more than doubled its value. So, I think it's just being. It is harder, obviously, these days to launch a new game and keep it fresh. Because there's so much noise. But I think you're right with Dougal, and I think the grassroots, and we're starting to see, as in people playing apps, downloading the app, and then asking, where's the real version? And then they go and buy the board game, and then the companies like that. If you look at sort of the Euro gaming, that's been going on for 15 years trying to get that sort of into the mass, and it's starting to go now. It's starting to go, and people are starting to discover these games, which have been around for a long, long time, and it's a fantastic new game. So it's hard to say. It's such a broad area in games too.
And just one thing about that, but within Monopoly, there's an innovation to keep the interest. So it's really down to the content. So with a lot of games that are, say, like Zombicide or one of these games, you release expansion packs to keep the interest and stop that kind of plateauing, really, and maybe even decline. And so with Monopoly, every year there's a new item, which is an innovation, electronic banking or a different theme, different mover, and that keeps interest in the brand and has a halo effect around, potentially the core game, but brings in people and keeps interest. So the plateau, you can innovate to kind of stimulate growth and beyond that. So we're going to have one more question.
We got one at the back, if there's...
Oh, so we got sorry.
Yeah, hi. My name is Sandra. I just want to ask you, where is child development taking part on all this, or what interest or what concern does it has, putting a little bit on the side the business priority? Child development over business. How is this taking part?
We had a product. It was our first product with Wow Stuff, which was Dave the Funky Shoulder Monkey, who was a little animatronic monkey that would sit on your shoulder, and you had a remote control in your pocket, and it interacted with people. And we actually were really pleased to hear that people liked it because it was stimulating interactions between kids. And you were saying, what makes a great toy? I think if the child gets something new out of the experience of playing with it, and that can be a developmental benefit, maybe, and that's great for parents to see as well. It doesn't have to be educational as such, but I think if we can, and it shouldn't be in everything, but if we can get in some kind of benefit for the child in terms of how they look at the world or how they interact with other kids, I think that's a positive. And I think not every toy is able to do that, and it wouldn't be right for it to do that. But where it can, that's great. And that's good for the toy company as well, because if the parent sees that the child actually enjoys playing with it and gets something out of it, then they'll come back and buy more product from them. So that's got to be a good thing. And we did actually hear that some teachers had been using Dave in schools, and also Keep On, which was our follow-up, which was originally a robot developed for kids with autism. And that product wasn't that research robot, but money that was part of the revenue that came in from that went to a fund to fund the actual robots that went into schools and helped kids and teachers and researchers in that field.
Okay, great. A last kind of closing comment on that from Torquil, and then we'll have to wrap up.
Yeah, I'm interested in developing new toys because I think that was what your question was about. And I work with my son, who has built up a very successful toy business for Inventions. And it's perfectly true that you have to learn how to take rejection, because you get far more of that than you get successes. But on the other hand, he now operates with 30 odd companies around the world, and so he has probably developed 100 or so toys and games of different sorts, which he shows to the ones that he feels is most appropriate. There are various technological things that have happened that make this job easier, because I think most buyers get fed up with looking at drawings and things. So if you have you can buy these little copying machines that make plastic in 3 dimensions, which we have a couple now that are working overtime, which means you can make the most beautiful models. I mean, they look as good as something you'd buy off the shelf overnight almost with this computer machine. So that I think that if you're setting out to develop a range of toys, you want to think of as many ideas as you can, put them into model form or something that is, and then video follows from that, and do it in a thoroughly professional way. And it's surprising after years of grinding how many people you can talk to.
Yeah. Well, we're going to have to wrap up there. We could talk, honestly, probably for hours with these guys, but they're here afterwards. You can talk to them, ask them questions. They'll definitely give you some more insight. So last thing for me to do is to thank the panel, Torquil, Rich, Rena, and Jim. And I'm going to be handing it back to Samantha.